great to have you to join us today, Holly. And one of the great things we get to hear about is some of her experiences as she's leading the light in terms of how to lobby in New Zealand. We're certainly picking Holly to be a bit of a bright star over the next few years as we're thinking about not just lobbying and not just how to emphasise the Māori voice, but also what that might look in government and in Parliament over the next sort of 9 to 12 years. So we're really chuffed to have Holly along to talk about an area that we're not that good at doing. We're good at doing it in single voices across the planet, but we're not that good at doing it collectively. So on behalf of HTK and everyone that's come to join us, the Māori businesses have come to join us today, Holly, welcome and thank you for joining us. And yeah, ka koe te wā.
Kia ora koutou, ko Holly Suzanne Bennett toku ingoa, ko Te Arawa toku iwi, ko Ngāti Whakaue me Ngāti Pikiao toku hapu, ko Ohunimutu toku marae. So as Jay said, I'm Holly. I hail from arguably the best iwi in the motu Te Arawa, and whakapapa to Ngāti Whakaue and Ngāti Pikiao, so from Rotorua. I was born and raised here in Tāmaki Makaurau, and then I've lived in Whanganui-a-Tara, Wellington, and also Kirikiriroa before finding myself back here in Tāmaki Makaurau. I do work predominantly as a lobbyist, and I will go into that in more detail later and talk about what impact lobbying can have on Te Ao Māori, and also what impact lobbying can have on your own pakihi. But before I talk about that, I wanted to touch on my journey into business, because it's not a natural one. It's not one that I sort of decided that's what I want to do and it's going to lead the path for my career. I went to law school, Auckland University, and I went there to be a lawyer, to be either a criminal defence attorney or a prosecutor. Those are my two jobs that I wanted to do. And then the thing that I found when I got to university, while it was a good place to learn how to think, I didn't like the influence of being told what to think, right? And that's a lot of to do with my upbringing. So I brought up in a highly political household with my papa, who worked as a broadcaster, and his whole career was made off winding up politicians. And so what that led me to do was always to have a critical view on what I thought and how I thought about things. And I probably had far too much of an interest in current affairs for someone who was 17, 18, 19, 20 than my peers. So when I got through law school, I wasn't an A+ student. I probably wasn't even a B+ student. I remember I got C- in ethics, which leads quite nicely to the fact that I'm a lobbyist. But what I did do is, because I didn't get great grades, I needed to find a job straight out of university. And so I went to work in Manukau District Court, so our biggest court in Aotearoa. And when I was working there, you work on the front line of justice, and I got to see some really eye-opening things and sort of get my first touch in the public sector. And I remember it was quite a jarring experience, and it led me to believe, well, what is it that I really want to do? And that led me to my first step into policy. And I went down to Whanganui-a-Tara and learned all about policy, because believe it or not, you don't learn everything at university. And they might like to tell you that how they teach you everything is the reality. It's far from it, especially I imagine in business. And then down in Whanganui-a-Tara, I got attracted by the world of politics, got some advice to go and work over in the Beehive. So I took that step. And in 4 years, I worked my way up from an entry-level role as like a front desk to an in-house legal counsel and ministerial advisor. What that meant, though, is that's where I got to cut my teeth in the heart of politics and the heart of what it is to be in government. And you work alongside ministers, making decisions like this government's doing every day that actually impact upon New Zealanders. And I know that elections and politics seem like this meaningless concept when we vote, because we think we're just 1 of 5 million. How does that actually equate? But when you're in those rooms and you're with the Prime Minister and they're making decisions, and then you know that's going to be on the 6 o'clock news at night, you realise that's actually a very real thing. And before I left in 2017, the thing I found most difficult, though, was lots of the tables that I sat at had the same people around them. And I found that quite disconcerting, because how was I ever going to be able to get divergence of thought and therefore give good political advice to those who I serve if I couldn't hear from everyone. So I made a distinct decision when I left working in the Beehive at the end of 2017 that I was going to do something a bit different. I didn't want to go back into law, but I wasn't quite sure that I wanted to go back into the public sector either. And so I was having a conversation with my papa in his office, and I was talking about helping all these businesses deal with the new government, because in 2017 we had a government change and lots of businesses weren't expecting it. So they were saying, oh, can you help us get in front of the new government? And it was my papa who said that you should turn that into a business. And I said to him, that's weird. And he said, it's weird that you think it's weird. And then I thought, okay, I'll turn it into a pakihi. So I literally was in his office. I said, okay, I'll set up a business, and then did it on the computer there and then. And that was when my business was born. And so it was nothing more than a thought. But when you do that kind of stuff, and then you start to, as every business owner on this call will understand, you then have to start making it real. And so the thing I did, which I was so nervous about going into business at 27, was whether, as a lobbyist, would I be able to do it? Especially given that I hadn't worked for another entity as a lobbyist and then gone into like practice on my own. So one thing I did is I took money from my personal account, $300, and I put that in my business account. And I thought, this is going to be my seed funding. This is all I'm going to invest into trying to get this off the ground. And I kid you not, I started in December. January and February, I felt like I cried every single day. And if I say my papa is the reason that I got into business, my mama is the reason I stayed in business, because papa set the whittle, but mum was the one that helped me through it, right? She was the one that dealt with the crying daughter when I had no money and suddenly I couldn't buy ASOS anymore, which is a online clothing store. And I couldn't do all those things that I had become accustomed to, earning a salary, working in the public sector, where it comes in no matter what. And so I remember it was about the end of February, early March 2018. So I'd only been in business 2 months, 3 months, and it's arguable whether you can say you're in business when you have no clients. And I got my first client and I got my first invoice, and it was only $400, but it was that feeling of, oh, wow, I can actually do that. And it was modest, but I remember that I got the account all the way down to about 70 cents. And I thought, like, I can't have any more like coffees with people talking about why they needed my services. Like, if they wanted it, they needed to pay for the coffee themselves, and I'd have a water. But when I got that led to the next one, and then the next invoice was about $2,000. And then it's when that started to hit my stride. But the reality is, it took about 2.5 years until what I always remember Vaughan telling me is it's about getting rid of a lumpy cash flow. And it took about 2.5 years to get over that, whereas it's like sort of up and down, up and down. And so I'll be 4 years at the end of this year. And so to look at it back now and I think, wow, I started that business for $300. I don't know if I could do it again. Everyone says, of course you could do it again. But the things that I learned out of that is that it's really easy to spend the money when you've got it. It's very hard to hold on to it. And you have to think about doing things creatively. So in setting up my business, a lot of things that I did was barter. I traded my time and services to getting things, whether that be a website, a logo, all of those kind of things, because you have to be creative when you set yourself like really distinguishable goals. And in terms of as a concept which is called bootstrapping, I think it's one of the lost arts in business. I don't think a lot of people think about it as something that they can do, but a lot of some of the most amazing business owners I've met have done it bootstrapped. They've bootstrapped their business. That is that they've not taken out loans, not searched for investment, but it means your growth is slower. But at some point, sometimes it's almost better growth because you know that you can sustain it. So then fast forward to where I am now. I've got 3 employees, 2 contractors. We've got a nice tari in Tāmaki Makaurau in Newmarket here that I can't access right now. But what it is that we're really doing. So one of the things that Awhi, my business, tries to do in lobbying is to think about lobbying in a way that's win-win, not win-lose. So when you traditionally think about lobbying as a concept, now it's no different from government relations, political engagement, advocacy. They're all the same thing. They're just different terms. but you'll find that lobbying has negative connotation and advocacy has positive, which is why I purposely call myself a lobbyist, because they're exactly the same thing. I'm not afraid of a kupu, and no one should be afraid of a kupu. What do we try to do? Win-win lobbying. So it's taking this idea that if we're going to come to government with a concept that we think that they should get in behind, and it's something that we believe in, we've got to put something on the table, and so do them. So it's not just a one-way relationship. So often lobbying is used as this tool, which is seen as like, well, I want this at your expense, or vice versa. If you do this, it's at our expense. And so one of the ways I try to talk to all of my clients is that how can we do things a little bit differently to get good outcomes for everyone? Now, this is not a new concept in any way, shape, or form. And nothing that I know, all of my makaranga that I have, all of the knowledge that I have is not mine. It's all come from other people. All I've done is just taken it all together and then put it and then presented it in a way that I think simplifies the conversation so that people can understand. Because lobbying as a concept is something that I can guarantee all of you do in your businesses. I know that HTK does it on behalf of Te Ao Māori and on behalf of pakihi Māori. But you don't know that you do it because no one's ever taken the time to sit you down and say, oh, well, that's the concept of lobbying, that's the concept of advocacy. And so I just want to help demystify it. Now, what also happened in growing up was that I actually found that there was a really distinct lack of skills in terms of how to do advocacy effectively. Because it's all very well to write a letter to your MP, put up a social media post, get something written in the media, but there's also another art to it. And so I work with some amazing chief executives who know their stuff inside out, but when they came to political engagement, it was just a big question mark. And so what I thought there is, if they're all asking me the same thing, and it's probably because they feel safe to ask me those questions, there's probably a lot more people out there who don't know what the stuff is. And that sort of spurred on my second business, which exists, and it's called Engage, and it's Aotearoa's first advocacy training organisation. So it's set up to teach people the skills, because one of my ambitions for Te Ao Māori is that by 2025, every iwi across the motu has its own lobbyist. And the reason why I want that to happen is that I have been blessed to be able to be the lobbyist for tiarawa. And in the 3 and a bit years that I have been, I have seen tangible benefits for our iwi. We have got tangible outcomes that have happened from thinking about the stuff strategically. And for me, I always think, well, if it's good enough for big business, if it's good enough for these long-term associations that have existed, like Federated Farmers and Dairy in New Zealand, it's good enough for us too. We just need to know how to do it. So one of my things through Engage is making sure that more people can learn these skills and therefore get better outcomes, not just for their businesses, but for themselves, their whānau, and their communities. So I guess in a nutshell, one of the things that I'm really, really keen to traverse today with the rōpū, if anyone has any questions or wants to delve into the concepts of lobbying and advocacy in more detail, but also sort of discuss how you can practically put the stuff into your business, because it's really interesting to talk about stuff as a concept, but it's much harder to action it. And so if anyone on the call, if you have any questions about actioning advocacy, I'd really love to delve into that too, because there's lots of ways that business can be a force for good, that is using it for advocacy that's impactful, and sometimes it's just having those illuminated for you.
Kia ora, everyone. Thank you, Holly. And if you've just joined us, we're talking to Holly Bennett, and Holly Bennett has been describing what it is to be a really great advocate, what it is to use the $300 and try and grow yourself from an idea to how you would communicate this with chief executives, how you would communicate this with tribes, and get them organized to a point where if the biggest partner in New Zealand is the partner that spends about 30 to 40% of all money that flows around the economy, you probably should have a pretty good idea and a strategy about how you might want to talk to them. And so Holly's been talking to us about her idea, starting again, 4 years in the making with $300, encouragement from her papa to, hey, join the dots here. you are a born advocate, and then using that legal background, using a policy background, to start to think about how she could create that not just for herself but for other businesses. And so we've also got this idea too that this is a really good skill set to have, to understand the machine of government. Most of us don't even understand the machine of tribes, let alone our own Māori community. And so it's getting us to think a lot wider about that. And so when you were thinking about setting up the advocacy the arm, which was looking to educate young people, tell us more about the kind of person that naturally fits. Who is that kind of Maui tiki tiki, or are they the silent type? But what kind of person actually does this?
So I'd have to say that you have to tend to have a more outgoing personality to be to sort of jump into the sort of advocacy. And the reason why I say that is because advocacy, in a nutshell, lobbying is about relationships. And if you find it really hard to build relationships, then what you find is advocacy is a lot harder. It's not impossible, it's just a lot harder, because there have been times where I've had to build relationships by literally walking up to someone, usually an MP, at a big group session, hui, whatever it might be, event, introducing myself, and then having a conversation, which would turn into a conversation to have another conversation at a future time, and create relationships like that. Now, that's very hard for somebody who's a little bit like whakamai, a little bit nervous. That's quite hard for them. Whereas for me, because I'm quite an outgoing personality, I think, it's easy. I just go talk to everyone. It's not to say that people who are more naturally more less outgoing can't do it. It just means it's a lot harder, because a lot of the stuff that I do fundamentally just revolves around whakawhanaungatanga and making sure that you've got these relationships that are strong, that they're meaningful, and that they're looked after. And that takes a lot of work in itself, which is why I find a lot of chief executives hate doing this, Mahi, because they're very driven and directed, and they don't want to have a million coffees, and I get it. Not to say that my Mahi is just coffee, I'm not saying in one moment, but what it means is that I really like that side of things, whereas they don't. They'll just be like, yeah, cool, we got this report to do, this to do, we need to do this funding, we need to get in this, and they're very much like that, whereas this stuff is a huge time suck, and then for them it feels like they're being taken away from what is their fundamentals. I do think, though, there's inherent benefit in everyone knowing their civics education and knowing how it works. And that was fundamentally one of the things that I was trying to build into my programs when I was building out Engage, which was price points for everyone. So prices starting from $300 all the way up to $6,000. But at every price point, people can get some education, because the point is that if you know how it works, then you'll have more confidence, and then it's only natural that you're going to get better outcomes. Because one of the things lots of people think about, especially with the public sector, is they don't actually know what's in behind it. They don't actually know what's driving people's decisions, and they don't know where to look for information.
It's a good point. So that's a good point there, because really the only kind of resource which describes the problem you're describing is that it was the book in the 90s and the 20s of Unbridled Power by Sir Geoffrey Palmer. And so unless you've read that book, it's pretty hard to actually understand the machine, or unless you're a public servant, or unless you're Vaughan, you make it up as you go. I mean, and try and make it sound convincing. But in the end, what is actually the sort of resource book to understand the machine that you've seen that's actually of any use out there, other than coming through Awhi and coming through your program? Like, what would you say about that in terms of how do I learn about this stuff? Do I need to go and get a politics degree from Victoria University if I can't even have an idea about this?
Carl, I'd recommend not getting a politics degree, because I don't think they tell you a lot about politics realistically. I remember in the Beehive when I was working there, somebody came to me with a paper and said, this is how I talked about cabinet committees working, right? And cabinet committees are just the top part before you get to cabinet to put something to the Prime Minister and ministers to make decisions. And I looked at the paper, and bear in mind I worked in a minister's office. I was like, this is not how cabinet committees work. And they were like, but this is how the lecturer taught us. I said, well, it's not true. So yeah, your question is fundamentally correct. You've got a big disconnect between how it's being taught and what exists out there and actually what you need to know. So my whole thing is if you know the fundamental principles, even just the separations that you've got, whether that be executive, parliament and officials, they're all fundamentally different groups. If you know them, then you can at least go some way to be able to navigate through this with a little bit more confidence than knowing nothing.
Tell us about the tribe. So, you've been working with Te Arawa for some time, and you've been working for small businesses and medium businesses at the same time. And you mentioned before that you'd love to see actually, an advocate for every tribe over the next few years where, you've clearly got tainu and ngāi tahu that just do that. In Wellington, we would just walk across the street and knock on the door and harangue them. So, but, the other 97 tribes, tell us more about that experience with Te Arawa and how you're seeing that unfold, because that's a big vision to have that, but clearly it's something that tribes need.
Right. So it's been one of the most, for me personally, it's been one of the most soul nourishing things to be able to use my skills to be able to give back to my iwi first and foremost. And I think that's what a lot of us are looking for. How do we use the things that we love to do to help support our own people? And it was actually our chief executive, Karen Verko, who was the person who told me that, who said to me, it didn't matter where I was at with my real journey, that I actually had a skill set that our people needed, and that was far more important than worrying about whether I'd be able to mihi to a point where, it would have been expected back in the day. So
we feel the same way about Pete. Pete understands this,
So when I got over that hurdle, really it was about them being embraced by my own. And then it was like, okay, well, what are we doing right now? And I can only speak for what I've seen of Te Arawa, but I imagine this is probably reflected across the motu, which is we have a lot of sirs and dames across, like a te ao Māori. They are not your advocacy strategy.
It's a good one right there, Holly. Let's stay on that, because that's been a real default of Te ao Māori is who is the tā in the community, and let's get that person to solve all our problems for us at a government level. Tell us more about that. Why is that the wrong idea?
Well, I put it quite simply for me, is that I'm now 31, right? So I got another 30, 40 years service to our country. And when I look at our Tātou Curtis, he's already done 60, 70 years of service to our people. So for me, I look at quite simply like this. He should be the one there that we come to for that really, really clear, sage advice. And then we go down to Whanganui Atara on behalf of the iwi and get the wheels turning. We get the stuff moving. We get the conversations going in order to have those things happen so that then Tātobi can announce things alongside ministers. Tātobi can do the ribbon cutting and all of that kind of stuff. I don't want these people, for me personally, that have served for 50, 60, 70 years to be put on a plane and be the first thing that we use in order to get things moving, right? My job as an advocate, if you look across any other industry, they don't send their chief executive first, they send their chief executive last. So for me, it's that same principle, is that all the kai mahi do all the mahi first, right? With the vision of what it is said by our rangatira, and then get everything working. And that they're there as a sort of end delivery point rather than the beginning.
Yeah, that's very, very helpful. And how has that been going in Te Arawa? Because it hasn't always been a gender-friendly place, let me put it that way. Like how is that sort of kind of, hey, that we're going to defer to the young wahine to go and do that? How is that been unfolding?
Do you mean Te Arawa is not a gender-friendly place?
I'm just saying, generally tribes tend not to be, overly supportive, particular communities, and where it does happen, there's clearly there's some specialness that happens. But it wouldn't have been easy, actually, trying to work this through with the old guard, saying, hey, guys, this is a better way of doing it. You don't need to jump on the plane.
I'll tell you what changes it. What changes it is outcome. When you can achieve something, doing it the way that you have decided that it should be done, and then you get them the outcome, that changes the way that everyone looks at it. It only takes one thing to have it pull together to get that outcome, to suddenly be like, okay, maybe we should look at that. And that's exactly what happened with me, because make no mistakes about it, when you're working for iwi, they're harder on you than anyone, right? As you well know, like your own whānau, you have to move heaven and earth. And I don't for one second say that's a bad thing, and I will do that and I will continue to do it. But I had to prove myself. But once I proved it, cool, that was signed, sealed, and delivered strategy. And then what would happen is that then it would be the leadership saying to other parts of the old guard who didn't maybe naturally align to this style, that say, well, this is the person that we're trusting to do this. This is what we've got thus far. This is yep. And then so we all need to go in line with that.
Yeah, it's a reminder again about, at least getting some success on the board. And I'm sure Vaughan wants to chip in here too and talk about success. But yeah, people are actually waiting as well for you to trip up, and you've actually got to prove yourself there for a while.
Right.
Sorry, mate.
Jace, if you want to talk about success, you're talking to the wrong guy. But hearing this korero here, all cool. Holly, I'm talking only with a small business hat on, because outside of that, I know very little. But on one hand, advocacy is important, completely accept that. But on the other hand, looking around the landscape of small business and all the successful little silos and rabbit holes that there are out there, are we not just at risk of doing what the Crown's had us doing for the last 182 years, and that's getting into a perpetual pissing competition with, in terms of who's got the shortest dress with the Crown? Because that's all, when you said about across the iwi and all of that and advocacy, but if I think about our voice to government from a small business community, like Māori don't have one, right? We have no voice. There is no one in the community that is a voice. How do we fix that cohesively? And not the kind of breaking rank, which is the current situation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but you're coming from the premise that all small business owners think the same, which they fundamentally don't. It's exactly the same as Te Arawa Māori. Everyone's looking for that one Māori voice. That's why, for me, fundamentally, I disagree with Tāmaki Māori for saying that they speak for Māori, because saying that there's a small business voice or saying that there's a Māori voice, these things don't exist, because we're not a cohesive, one stop of people. We've all got our different views, we've all got our different values, and so you're going to find a collection of small business owners that think this way and a collection of small business owners think this way. And it's the same thing with iwi, especially with hapu. You have hapu that disagree with one another, and so then it makes it very, very difficult to then have to push these things forward in a collective manner, because you only have to do one thing wrong for one person, and then they're like, right, I'm not involved in this anymore, I'm just going to bow out. So coming from the perspective of, is our voice lost? I guess the first thing you have to ask yourself is the small business, what are the things that small business as a part, as a collective can agree on? Because they're not going to agree on everything. And that's true for every single chamber, every single association, and all of that kind of thing. And then when you can agree on what's the things that you agree on, make a concerted effort to change that at the policy level, whether that be with ministers and officials, rather than trying to change everything carte blanche, because there's always going to be people that agree, always going to be people that disagree. So it's trying to find that most collective common ground that you can push forward.
Cool. Kia ora, Holly, that's awesome. I'm not sold, and I'll tell you why. I think that my 59 years have told me in small business, Māori or non-Māori, the key issues that you need to speak to government about are the same. It's cash flow, it's people, it's mental health, or whatever. There are nuances for Māori, but there are not nuances across the respective iwi or whatever.
I would disagree with that fundamentally, because I don't think the government's responsible for my cash flow. I don't think the government's responsible basically for anything in my business, because I set out my business to not only help myself, but to help my whānau and to help my communities. As far as I'm concerned, the government can stay as far out of my pakihi as possible. I don't think that they should be involved in my cash flow. I think that for me, as the director of my company, the responsibility and the onus is on me to make sure that I'm serving the business the best. Yes, you can tell business about cash flow, but I don't think it's the government's job to fix that, because otherwise then we're saying, what else do they need to be there to fix? And for me, business is inherently self-interested, so I'm always going to be looking out for my best interests, which are not necessarily the government's best interests.
Oh, good.
100%. That's right. And at a micro level, that makes sense, Holly. I think when we talk about cash flow at a macro level, I'm talking about a GST refund or a resurgence payment or whatever. Government 100% does affect your cash flow, no matter what type of business you are. So at a bigger, broader level, and I think if you look at the small business strategy of 2019, faster payment from the agencies and ministries was a part of that, and it was to help the cash flow situation where they were stringing them out for 60 days or whatever.
Right, but that's if you rely on the public sector to pay your bills, which I don't. I work predominantly in the private.
Yeah, for your taxes you do though.
Yeah, it's a good topic.
What I'm saying when you're talking,
it's a good topic. So we've got a Raukawa tiarawa debate here, which is the government responsible for all of my problems or not? And if they are, then what part might they be responsible for? And so, Holly's clearly saying, hey, look, if you are in business, you're going to have to take 90% plus responsibility for that, regardless of what happens. Regardless of which party comes into power, regardless of whether you've got a Māori business community, regardless of whether you've got a COVID subsidy, in the end, you live and die on your own decision. And so a timely reminder about what it takes actually to be in business, because if you don't have that kind of mindset, then you are going to probably fall over at some point as soon as there's a COVID outbreak or a change in government. We appreciate that is something that Māori businesses need to think about. We need to be quite strong and resolute on that idea. And then when you come back to this kind of changing landscape of party politics and what you've seen coming out of National and then entering into a Labour government, what's been happening there, Holly? What do you see as coming in terms of that transition? Who was easier to deal with, and what you're seeing coming up over the next election period?
Well, it's very easy to deal with the government that you work for, isn't it? So when I was in there, I didn't have to worry about anything because I was the one that was, that I was helping make the decisions and sitting there. But what I would say is that I far more enjoy what I'm doing now on the outside, where I have no allegiance to anyone. It's a far more enjoyable place. What I would say is that what I think and how I conduct myself, especially in and around politics, has a direct correlation to how much money I can make, right? Because if I go out there saying, like, popping off about X, Y, or Z, but that's a hui that I have for a client coming up in a week, 2 weeks, you can't be that ignorant to say that those things don't impact one another. So I just try to keep my own personal views, my own personal whakaaro in and around politics, not policy, in and around politics to myself. Because at the end of the day, everyone's entitled to their opinion and everyone's got one, but it is what it is. No one's opinion is more valid than anyone else's.
Yeah, that's a good point there. Got to hold on to your gunpowder at times. You've in a role where you're advocating like that, you can see that you could quite easily drift in and out of your own personal politics and your own personal views about how things should occur. And I know that you've done a huge spread of different advocacy work, from sort of advocacy around work that's been happening with the police, advocacy that's been happening around small, medium business, advocacy which, in the retail associations, advocacy around tribes, and all of these different subsets. They are looking for a champion. They're looking for someone that can just take them to the next level and say, how do you help me engage at a stronger, more clearer level that I might not be able to win here, but I need help. And yeah, tell us a little bit more about some of those moments where you thought, shit, I'm doing the right job here, or man, I don't know what I'm doing because this is hard?
I think the most common, well, I guess actually my number one challenge that I have with my line of mahi is that I get too involved, that I care almost, I know it sounds a bit conceited to say this, but it's like I almost care too much. And I know that because there's times where I'll get off hui with clients or like people that they're advocating for, and I'll just be in tears. And that for me is something that I have to work on, especially over the next few years, to sort of maybe go back to the more clinical legal sense of things. You know how when you take on a client and you're just advising them to get the best outcome rather than sort of being self-invested. So that's something I need to think about. But I know when I have rofu that say to me, oh, we couldn't have done it without you, I know I'm doing the right mahi. It also makes me go, but you should be able to do it without me. So it's sort of like a catch-22.
Yeah. I know everyone's about to saying somebody's got your mic muted.
Just Holly, in terms of your bit about the you care too much and the crying part, I would never let that go, because we Māori, we're not passive people. We're fucking angry and we're conquerors, and that's what drives us. And so if you're feeling that, feel it, man. You know, it's like it's okay to lose your shit. You know, don't step off the mat and go beyond policy, but yeah, you know, that's who we are as people. So yeah, you're a fighter, not a lover. So,
yeah, it's a great point that there's good tears and there's hard tears. Hey, and so we sort of kind of acknowledge when we're having good tears and when, oh man, this is really hard. That's right. But actually this is the juice is why I got into it in the first place, because I thought I could make a change. So you're caught in the conundrum, which is, okay, this is what it actually feels like when I'm doing the work, doing the hard work. Okay, can I keep doing this then? Really good moment. Really, really good moment. So it's clearly something that you still want to keep doing, and you still want to ensure that people understand how to do this properly. And if you could name the top 3 clients that you would love to be the head advocate for, who would that be in New Zealand? What's your love and passion, and what are you seeing as the issues that you would love to try and get more signal across?
I don't know. I have pretty fantastic clients right now. I mean, we only work with those that we have a values alignment with. So really, if people come to me with a self-interested kaupapa that's going to help shore up their business, or maybe shore up their sort of patch in the world rather than from a collective lens, I'm not really interested in those sort of kaupapa. Not to say it's a bad thing, it's just not the things that I'm driven by. But I guess there's 3 of the most impactful lines of mahi that I've done over the past 12 months has definitely been leading the mahi for Constable Matthew Hunt's whānau, who was the police officer that was shot on the line of duty, and making sure that their kōrero was heard by every single political party in Parliament, and getting that petition across every single major news outlet in Aotearoa. The Mahi, the advocacy work for Restaurant Association of New Zealand, which is helping hospitality, which is one of the hardest hit sectors because of COVID. And then also working for my iwi. It is just one of the most rewarding things when you can sit there and help them push kaupapa, and also be somebody that can help them maybe move a little bit of raru from one side, and so we can just sort of go in the direction and sort of not have the history attached to us. And I mean, that's one of the benefits of being 31, is that I haven't seen everything for the past 30, 40 years that has happened. I only have my small lens of the world. And as we know, memories serve us for a long time. So I'm sure in 20 years' time, I'll have a lot of stories for the young advocates coming through. But for right now, I don't have too many that are changing the way I view things and how I do my mahi.
Hi, Holly. Okay, we're talking to Holly Bennett today. leading Māori advocate / lobbyist around the place, and is talking to us about some of her passions, some of her clients that have created hard tears, good tears, got her thinking about the kinds of work she'd like to do in the present and the future, and also some of the work that she's doing across tribes. And we're really pleased to have her in here to tell us about that. I know Pete's got a question, so I'm going to hand it over to Pete. And kia ora.
Yeah, amazing you started a business on $300. Congratulations. I mean, we don't see many stories like that, and you're probably underinvested, just to put it out there for you, okay? A couple of things from me. Interested in what you're saying about the iwi with the advocacy and lobbying. You're obviously happy to champion these things with your background. Are you seeing a willingness for more people to step forward and take on some of these roles? Because a lot of people are happy to let someone else do it. And I see it in a lot of organisations I've been involved in. Oh, I know, it takes a real bit of guts to step up and do it. I'm just kind of hoping there's another Holly coming, or how do we ensure there's the next Holly? Or I think you get
you hit the nail on the head. There's so many people that are reluctant to go into this space because you have to be quite ballsy, because you not only have to say no to like ministers and politicians and stuff like that, or necessarily like disagree with them and put something compelling, but you also at times have to say no to your clients as well, because your job is to actually give them the best advice. It's not just to agree with them. And so honestly, one of the things is I figure if my job is to create the pipeline of future advocates, then all I can do is sort of start, started a year ago, start now, and then just try to encourage as many people, especially many young people, to pathway into it as a career. Because what I say to people is, and it goes to the heart of what you said when you're underinvested in your business at the start, right? What my dad said, having a conversation with him in his office where he was like, you should turn it into a business. That is not how I want any further advocates to come into this as a career. It's not a foolproof way of having a successful business, right? And so in no way, shape or form is that what I want the next generation to think of, oh, I have to do it on my own. No, I don't want you to have to do it, because it was so hard. And it was especially hard doing it from Kirikiriroa. So now it's just thinking about illuminating it more as a career, illuminating it as a career path that earns good putia, and then that you can do things good as well, right? So I think it's just changing the narrative from what it has existed for the past 100 or so years, and then trying to do what I'm doing now. If I have my way, then in 10, 15 years, well, I'll hopefully be redundant. So,
hey, I want to jump in.
Pete,
I want to jump in on that. If there is something that's black and white in evidence to me in Māoridom, is that the women are the fearless ones in this era that we're in, the tsunami of women that have come through. I mean, the men might have the balls, but man, the wahine have the backbone. I mean, it's unbelievable what you see. God bless you. We need more. And I'm speaking for myself in that regard. Seriously. Awesome.
Yeah, no, there is a wave. There is a large tsunami of wahine Māori that are coming through. You had your time, Vaughan. Sorry.
Now,
move over. But talking about Māori males, Papa obviously had a huge effect on you, which was, okay, you were surrounded by conversations of what was going on in New Zealand, and what was going on in the political parts of New Zealand, and sort of that ongoing kind of narrative which kind of kept you informed. I mean, in the end, who else like that is still keeping you honest? Who's keeping Holly honest on both your own perspectives and keeping you clear on things? Is Sir Toby chipping in, or who's actually chipping in and describing some of this for you? Who are your mentors?
Of course, Toby will always tell me my strategy is not up to scratch, which is what I love, because as I said, he has been doing lobbying. Many of our rangatira have been doing lobbying long before I came, long before I was even born, right? But when you say who are my mentors, who are the people that are keeping me in check, honestly, it's still mama and papa. And the thing is that they have very diverse views on politics. So I'll ring up one and have a conversation about something, and then the other one will take the phone, and then I'll get the other side of the conversation, and then I will have covered everything, and then I'll be like, okay, cool, now I have a greater lens of what it is that I need to do. The other thing is that we have a rule in our tari, which is that it's not what I say goes, it's what we all decide together. And I think that's really, really important, because I don't know everything and I'm not right all the time. And actually, I'm very blessed to have extremely smart, pragmatic, practical kaimahi. And I always ask them, what do you think? And on numerous times, we've changed the position or changed the direction because of what they said. And I think that's one of the most powerful things that you can do, because if you have a team and you're not listening to them, why do you have a team?
Yeah,
so just one more question from me, Holly. You talk about government, and there's of course local government. Are they the same beast, or do you manage them differently?
So the short answer, no, they're not the same beast.
Yeah.
And do you manage them differently? Yes, I just don't talk to local government.
Oh, hold on.
Good answer.
Sage advice.
Clear strategy. Perfect.
Honestly, I find local government one of the most exhausting things ever. I think that for anyone on the call that's thinking about getting into advocacy, if you wanted to set up your own lobbying firm, which is around local government, you could make a mint, because there's lots of central government lobbyists that don't want to deal with local government.
Well, Pete and Vaughan have fallen in love with Auckland Unlimited, so that just reaffirms. That reaffirms for me, what where their strategy is going. So, no, thank you for clarifying that about local government. I don't have an opinion on it. I prefer to listen to everybody and take in everyone's concerns, but like the kaimahi, before making a decision on that. Okay, kia ora koutou. We are talking to Holly, and we've only got 2 to 3 minutes left spending with her. And of course, this is an opportunity for you whānau as well to if not today, but at least reach out to Holly if there are clearly some key lobbying issues, advocacy issues that you're thinking about for your own tribal community, for your own business. It's a good opportunity now that you've met Holly and seen her online, and to test her brain on certain things, on how you might be able to shape the world with some of your thoughts. The beautiful thing about our own thoughts is it only works if we can get masses of people to believe in it as well. So if we can accelerate that up faster, then that's probably a good idea. So make sure you keep Holly and her contacts close when you're thinking about making large impacts in the world, or actually just how you might be thinking about talking to Auckland Unlimited, like Pete and Vaughan are wanting to do shortly. So we've only got a minute or two left, and I'm going to let Holly have the last word and let us summarise if there were some takeaways for us to be thinking about in our world, in Māori business, in our community, how we might think about that, or how things we might not want to do as we're approaching those issues. Kia ora, Holly.
Hapai. So my final thought is basically to the fundamentals of lobbying and advocacy, because you might think one of the things that she mentioned was she was going to give me actionable tools, right? So it really fundamentally comes down to these 3 things. You've got to know your why you're advocating for something. What is it that you're doing? Why? Is it because you want to change legislation? Is it because you want pūtea? Is you want to inform policy? You've got to know the why. The next thing you need to know is the what. What are you going to say? Now, a lot of politics is just communications, so there's just messaging. So you've got to do your messaging well too. You've got to think about what you're going to say and then hold on to those talking points, and then you've got to drive them home. And then the final part of advocacy is the who. Who is it that you're going to talk to? Because if you're going to talk to the environment minister about small business policy, that's not going to work. It's not going to get you anywhere, right? But if you're going to talk to the small business minister about small business policy, that'll get you somewhere. So you always got to know your who. who is it that you're talking to. Make sure it's the right person to hear that message, because you might have the best message in the world, but if it doesn't go to the right person, it's going to go nowhere. So those are my 3 things to think about.
Wonderful. Thanks for those last messages. So yeah, really think about the why, the what, and the who when we're thinking not just about our lobbying, but actually when we're thinking about a lot of the stuff that we do in our business life. So Holly's a great reminder of that, and we want to give a big mihi out to her and all the mahi she's been doing, some of the great families and communities that she has been serving, and providing a sort of win-win advocacy. So on behalf of all of us here and on the Poari and Ngā Pakihi Māori, e mihi ana mātou ki a koe, Holly, me tēnei rā, ngā manakitanga me tō tirohanga ki te ao tō rangapau, me o wawata e pāne ki te whakapiki aki ngā pukenga o te iwi Māori ki te kaupapa o te māngai, te tino māngai o te hāpuri. Nō reira, ngā manakitanga ki a koe, mai a mātou. Thank you, Holly, for coming in today. Thank you for sharing your story. We loved to hear your your story from $300 right through to 4 or 5 years later. And whānau, I think we should all keep an eye on this wahine over the next 6 to 9 years as she sort of starts on her next chapter. And put a circle around Holly Bennett over the next few years. Nō reira, kia ora tātou. I'm going to whakaoti pai tā tātou huhuinga me nā kai kōrero katoa, me nā kōrero uhia ki rungi tō tātou tepu. Kia kahara tātou ki te tū, ki te mihi, ki te māngai, ki te whakarongo, ki te mōhio, ko wai, ki te mōhio, he aha, ki te mōhio, me pēhea. Ēnei kohinga katoa, e whakatakoto ki rungi tō tātou tepu o te ao Māori me te ao Pākehā me te ao nui tonu. Nō reira kia tau, nā manakitanga me nara kiru ki tēnā ki tēnō tātou. Kia mahi atu o maki ka toi te kupu, toi te mana, toi te reo, toi ngai tātou. Turuturu o tika maua kia tīna.
Tīna.
Haumi hui e.
Tai ki.
Thank you, whānau. See you next week. See you soon.
Thank you. Ka kite.